It's a privilege to be here. Thank you all for taking your time today out of your busy day to hear me talk about warrior women in leadership. Excuse me, and I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so if I cough, I hope you understand I'm armed and dangerous with water up here. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've been doing women's leadership work for really my whole life, but in my corporate environment, our Gaia Project for Women's Leadership arm really goes into corporations like Google and plenty of other places and helps women leaders to achieve. One of the things that's really key to where we find ourselves right now, though, at this moment in history, is that, as you all know, we're in the midst of a massive cultural shift, really a tectonic shift in women's leadership. And that means certain things right now for what women leaders are doing and the way in which we're operating that is very different from the messages that we've had before and the ways in which leadership has functioned before as well, because we're having more influence than we've ever had before on the leadership of companies, institutions, government, notwithstanding where we find ourselves at the moment, and also that we are in a position where our skills as women leaders are influencing how corporations function generally. So we're going to talk through today warrior women leadership as it stands right now and give you guys some really practical tools to walk away from in terms of what this means and what it means for leadership and what it means for professional development and also what it means for our culture and our world. So one of the things that I want to just start with is, what is a warrior woman in leadership? What does that look like right now? So when I talk about warrior women, what I'm talking about is how we have armed ourselves for change in this corporate and cultural environment that we're in right now. Warrior women in leadership to me is about an activist model of women's leadership. And we're going to talk through what that looks like in the context of your everyday. But we've seen more and more women really rising to create change, especially in the last 12 months. I think for obvious reasons. And we're also obviously, as I mentioned, seeing major cultural shifts right now. So one of the things that is important when we talk about warrior women in leadership is the historic backward-looking viewpoint of where we find ourselves. So traditional masculine models of leadership generally only measure two metrics that matter: the time that we invest and how much money we make, whether that's the money we make for ourselves or the money that we make for others. And those models are really difficult for women to rise within for a variety of reasons, because many of us choose to have children, because many of us historically also do so much more work at home than we do out in the world. And the metrics that we measure our success by also are different. Because generally speaking, we're more concerned with the quality of our lives, and this is a broad overgeneralization, but we're more concerned with the quality of our lives in total. And this is why we don't often hear men talking about work-life balance in the same way that we do women, than men tend to be. And so one of the things that is important to think about here is, who do we have as role models for what warrior women in leadership look like, or what women leaders look like generally? And as I talked through warrior women as a concept in the first stages of getting ready for this talk, one of the things that really struck me is that going back in our history, women in general have lost a lot of our history. It's been erased, and there's a lot that's been written about this generally. Really encourage you to look at it because you'll be amazed by what has been wiped from the history books. But we have had stories going all the way back to like the Odyssey of how men go through journeys that make them leaders. The hero's journey is a trope that we're all deeply familiar with. And one of the things that we haven't had historically is the journey of a heroine. What does the journey of a woman look like when we are progressing toward our highest leadership? And so one of the things that I want to start with today is a discussion of what the heroine's journey might look like in the context of the history that we know of from the hero's journey. So the heroine's journey is one that, as an initial matter, I want to say this about. It's not like we go through this journey once. One of the things that the studies show about the way that women learn, for instance, is that we learn cyclically, generally, much more than we learn in a linear fashion. And so you may have noticed that my corporate logo, for instance, is a spiral. There's a reason for that. It's because the journey that we are on as women leaders continues to cycle around over and over again. So what I'm going to share with you today in the context of this journey is something that I want to make very clear. You're not just going to go through once. Some heroines' journeys are harder than others, right? We're in a particular one as a culture right now for women leaders that is quite brutal. I think we can all agree. And yet at the same time, we cycle back continuously to learn over and over again the things that we need to learn on our path. So as you think through this for yourself in the context of what this might mean for your life, as you think through what it might mean for you in the context of the women you know and the women you work with, please remember that it's not like this is all just an over and done game. I wish it was. It would probably be a lot easier on all of us. So where we start the warrior woman journey, the heroine's journey, is first in the place of illusion. And when we think about women's leadership, This is the place where we talk about conformity. So it's the idea that if we dress a certain way, if we lean in enough, and don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of Cheryl, but I have to say I have very strong opinions about what Lean In has done for women leaders, and they're not all very good. If we show up in the right way as assertive, but not too assertive, as opinionated, but not too opinionated, if we smile enough, if we are people-pleasing enough, we will get along just fine in these traditional masculine leadership environments. That is the place of illusion. And I'm going to talk through a little bit more what this looks like in greater detail, but this is where we start our journey, with the belief that if we cope, if we have coping skills that work for us, then everything will be fine. Unfortunately, I think many of us can recognize that that's generally not the way it works. And so the next stage on the heroine's journey is the stage of betrayal. And this is the place where you recognize that your coping mechanisms have failed you, that you can still do it all, and do it all in the way that we've been told you have to do it to succeed as a woman, and still not have it happen. And part of that is systemic, and part of that is because we've been taught that this is the only way that we can do it. Don't worry, we're going deeper into all of this. The next stage of the heroine's journey is the one of awakening. And this is really the place of choice. You have a choice about whether or not you're going to just continue coping, or you have a choice about whether or not you're going to rise and fight. And I don't necessarily mean this in the Wonder Woman way, but that's kind of a nice little image to get in your head if you would care to. The awakening is the moment of recognizing that where we have been, it can no longer continue, and where we are going has to be something different, and we are the agent of that change, either individually or collectively. Then comes the descent. And this is the really kind of like not nice place in the heroine's journey. This is the place where we start to recognize the cost. And we recognize the cost of what we have paid to get where we are currently. We recognize the cost of continuing to fight. We recognize that nothing is ever going to quite be the same from where we find ourselves. And by the way, this all may sound very culturally familiar in terms of where we find ourselves right now as well. And it is the place where we choose our tools. And before we leave today, I'm going to talk through what some of these tools, aka weapons, might look like in the context of warrior women in leadership. But it is a place where we determine what it is that we need to succeed in a new model, the descent. The pit and the bottom of the heroine's journey is the hurricane. This is the place where we experience the maelstrom of transformation. Some of you who follow me on Facebook know that I have this thing that I talk about in terms of where we are culturally right now, which is the cauldron of transformation, the way it feels like everything is on fire, we're boiling, so much is changing in our culture and in our world right now and in our nation, and it's swirling all around us. The dangerous point of the hurricane is that sometimes there are points of relief. It's like the eye of the storm, and we're like, oh, maybe it's not quite so bad. Maybe I can let my guard down. Maybe I don't have to fight so hard. And then lo and behold, the next thing you know, the next day you're back in it and we're off to the races again. So the hurricane is really the bottom, and it's where we need the most tools that we can possibly prepare ourselves for. The next stage is loss. And this is really the place where we come face to face with the grief of what we have to sacrifice in order to move on to a new way of doing things. This is a place, by the way, that many of us find ourselves in right now. As I mentioned, I host this daily broadcast on Facebook called Resistance Live. And just last night, I had to post something about, I know everybody feels like they're in a pit of despair and in a pit of grief based on what has happened in the last couple of days in our nation. Please, recognize the grief is real, and also recognize that this place that we're in is not going to last forever. Loss on the heroine's journey necessarily leads to intervention. Now, some of you who may know the historic heroes' journeys may recognize this as the point where the gods send in the tools, right? Zeus kind of throws down the lightning bolts and all of a sudden everything gets better. In our case, intervention is actually really about connection, because it's about taking on our own agency and connecting with other women to move forward. And again, we're going to talk through this in a bit more depth. But intervention is the moment of change. It's the moment where we adopt our own agency and step forward to make the world more of what we want as women. And then rebirth. That's the place where we really build the future and continue to move forward toward the world that we want to live in. And then we return to our home territory, back to the top of the cycle. And again, remember, we're spiraling through all of this all the time. So rebirth and return is really about return to a place of stasis, not return to the place that we were before. And so the journey of the warrior woman is one that, and this is going to be a theme in what we discuss next, is a place of constant growth. It's not like the change ever stops. It may ease up from time to time, but the growth is continuous. So where does this take us in the context of women in leadership, and particularly in corporate, but also in government and politics and nonprofit and our lives, and how we move forward? So the place we start on this is at the place of illusion, which is that what we were promised is a lie. And this one is a particularly tough one, I think, for a lot of us to swallow, because for many of us who came up as women leaders, what we were told was, again, you do all these things right and it's going to be just fine, right? All you have to do is X, Y, and Z. And every time that you don't quite make it, there's just one more little thing that you need to do. You add to that the myth that women have been indoctrinated with, which is the idea that we can have it all, right? That there is an all to even have. And that if we do all the right things in terms of our home life and our work life, and we cope and we hire the right help when we need it, or we seek out other resources just to make it all work, that somehow we're going to hit some perfect balance. It's going to allow us to feel like we've hit some arbitrary measure of success. This whole thing is a lie. And the key point about this illusion that I want to just make at the moment is that we're starting to see all of this disintegrate right now in our culture, right? The idea that, again, Me Too maps very strongly onto what I'm going to talk about today, but the idea that, we have to just put up with a certain degree of discrimination, a little bit of harassment here, we're just not going to talk about it. This is just part of what you have to put up with in order to achieve on the job. All of that, lie, illusion. So where does this take us to now? We get to the point of betrayal next in the journey. And what I want to say about this is that women's leadership advocacy has done a lot, right? I don't want to discount that there are some very powerful voices out there in the leadership methodology that I work in my industry, who have done an awful lot to help women succeed. But what we have failed to do is teach women how to become their own best advocates, to teach women how to work together as change agents in leadership. And so to me, lifelong feminist right here, I just want to say that, very big believer in the principles of equality and equity that many of us are working toward. We have not gone far enough in the context of helping women to claim their own authority. It feels often as though what we're doing is pleading for change, rather than stepping forward and effecting change ourselves. And so the standpoint of betrayal is the point where we recognize that the coping skills that we had before, that we have been taught, sometimes taught by one another, are not enough to get us where we want to go. So the next place that we come to is awakening. And this is the principle of why we need warrior women. So, one of the things that I want to emphasize here when I talk about this is that the impact of powerful, embodied activist women leaders on corporate cultures and the world is potentially dramatic. Because one of the things that we have to recognize is that we have different ways of leading than what we have seen traditionally. And the studies bear this out, right? We are more collaborative. We are more communicative. Corporations that have more women on their boards of directors are investigated less. They're more productive. They're more profitable. They generate more revenue, generally speaking, compared to their peers. And all of this has to do with the fact that women as leaders connect. So warrior women in every environment can make a difference, assuming that we are empowered to step forward and create change. And so the point of awakening is the point that each one of us decides that we are going to step forward and claim our ability to advocate for different models of leadership. And I want to encourage all of you, no matter where you find yourselves in your career points at this point, to think about what's the choice that you have in front of you right now to make more of a difference in your lives, in your working environments, in your culture, in your world. What's the choice that you are faced with right now that may lead you to become more of a voice for the change that you want to see in the world? Because it benefits everything. It impacts everything that we do right now. So this brings me to a point of critique. Here we are in the dissent. And one of the things that you all may remember from back in 2016 is that when we had Hillary Clinton running for president, we saw a lot of these sort of what I like to refer to as lady power movements or commodity feminism, right? All of these kind of like powder pink websites for women's empowerment, and if you just wear the right suit and you put on the right pair of heels, everything's going to be okay. And I will admit that in my industry, I worked for some of these. Like, what a lot of people don't know is that I actually used to collaborate with Ivanka Trump many moons ago. But that is a prime example of commodity feminism. It's selling a solution that is not internal to yourself. And so what part of the messaging here in terms of how do we build stronger women's leadership, it has to be about self-origination. One of the things that I talk about all the time in corporate environments where I train and teach women leaders is the idea that when we change what's on the inside, we inevitably change what's on the outside. And so it's not like there is some easy one-size-fits-all solution that shifts us toward equity. We have to be empowered internally to make the shifts that are necessary to step forward to effect change. So commodity feminism is the descent. And by the way, this is also the point where we start to recognize the cost, right? Where we start to look inside ourselves and see, I have been guilted. I have been shamed into not being good enough. I have been told that my voice is meaningless. What does that mean in terms of what are the tools that I'm going to pick up next? How can I communicate more effectively? How do I need to refine the way that I operate in every environment so that I am using my voice? And so one of the things that we talk about when we talk about tools, and I'll talk about this in just a couple of minutes a little bit more, is the idea that we do need to adopt new weapons as women in leadership. So that may look like things like nonviolent communication. And for those of you who don't know, nonviolent communication strategies were developed by Marshall Rosenberg in the 1970s. And there are means by which you can effectively communicate your needs and wants so that they are heard from the perspective of the person on the other side of the table from you with compassion. This is a skill set, by the way, that I think everybody needs in every corporate environment. It is very much about this, what I experience, what I witness, what I value, and then requesting buy-in in a collaborative way. That skill set is one that for women in leadership is absolutely critical, because we need to be able to learn to advocate in ways that are different from pounding the table to demand what we want, very much traditional masculine leadership model. Whereas our collaborative means of asking for change and propelling forward in communication can actually shift things and help others to see the value of what we're after. So that's one tool. But I will also just add that in a lot of corporate environments these days, there's a lot of toxicity underway, and some of the tools that we need to think about empowering ourselves with are tools that, 5-10 years ago, I couldn't teach in corporate environments. Things like, how do you protect your energy so that when you're under attack, which we're about to get to in a minute, we're getting into the hurricane, you know that you are not taking on and internalizing the negative messaging that you're getting. How can you step forward and feel empowered in your body and in your presentation so that you are making an impact that shows others that you are not to be messed with? All of these skill sets and tools are new ones that we need to learn. And so one of the things that I do recommend for women leaders who are in the ground, on the battlefield every day with this, is that you think through how the experience that you have as a warrior woman is affecting you. Are you internalizing negative messaging? Are you having a hard time with how you can advocate and succeed and keep going? You may need to refine your skill set in this way. And these are the baseline on-the-ground skills that I teach every day in corporate environments. But it is an important point of recognition that we need new tools for new times. So now we get to the hurricane. And this is how warrior women are punished. So, one of the things that I like to be very blunt about in the warrior woman journey that I'm talking about today is nobody is saying this is easy, right? No one is saying that we're all going to step forward and kick some ass and win and it's all just going to get better overnight. Warrior women are punished relentlessly. All we have to do is look at the 2016 election. It's about how you talk, the sound of your voice, how you laugh, what you wear, your hair, your makeup, your body, whether or not you're meeting certain codes that convey certain bits of information that make you qualified or not. And I will also just add that as we work to transform our culture and we work to transform our society, privilege is a hard thing to let go of, right? We see the experience right now of old ways of doing things, old models of leadership, old means of operation clinging on by their fingernails to avoid any change in the world. And one of the things that means is that crazy attacks will come out of nowhere. Pizza parlors in Washington, D.C. come to mind, for instance. The level at which we have to be prepared to go to battle for the world that we want to build is significant. And as well, it's critical in this environment that we work together to hold one another up. So one of the things that I talk about when we talk about the importance of collaboration as a way through and connection as a way through is the issue of why we're better off together. So one of the things that I want to point out here, by the way, is that traditional male models of leadership encourage women to compete with one another. That's because we've been told that there's only room for so many of us at the top. That, by the way, is a part of the big lie. And one of the things that it means is that when we are competing with one another, when we are tearing one another down, when we are not helping to lift other women up in the corporate environment or elsewhere, we are not focused on how we can work together to actually affect change. It's a really convenient self-reinforcing mechanism of patriarchy that women like to tear each other down and beat each other up. And so one of the things that I really encourage here is that we think about how we can instead adopt a model. This is a very serious thought leadership pivot, but instead adopt a model that says when one of us wins, we all rise. This is a very hard thing for women to internalize, honestly, because we've been raised in a culture that says that's just not the way it works. But my standpoint on this is the following. When we recognize how much damage we've done to one another, and this is really why we're sitting in the place of loss when we talk about this, how much harm we've done to one another by not adopting a thought process that says, let me see how I can help my sister up. We recognize all the time that's been lost that would have affected change before now. And it also propels us to make change more in the future. So the image I like to work with on this is the idea of an ever-ascending pillar of humanity. Women, if you would like to think about it in that way, it can just be women, but I honestly think about it as gender neutral. And the idea of it is that we leave no one behind in hopelessness. We leave no one behind without opportunity. And so when one of your sisters is falling off the pillar, you are the person who leans down with your hand to grab her and pull her back up. This, as an image, as a metaphor, functions so well in the idea of how we can affect change in the environments that we are in, because when we see someone struggling, another woman struggling, when we see another woman working so hard to succeed, what can we do to help lift her up, rather than saying, oh, she sucks, let me just let her fail over there on her own. The more that we can consider the collaborative nature of how we can work together and abandon this idea of the zero-sum game. You know, by the way, the quote I always refer to on this front is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was asked one time how many women needed to be on the Supreme Court to make her happy, and she said 9. And the reporter was horrified by that story. And she said, what? You know, for centuries, it was 9 men on the Supreme Court. What's wrong with the idea of of all women on the Supreme Court all put together? And it's such a shocking idea to us, right? Because we've been convinced that there's just this tiny little slot that we have to fit into. So the pivot of abandoning the zero-sum game and then moving toward a place of collective and collaborative advocacy as women makes a huge difference in what we are able to accomplish. And so that takes us to several points of intervention here. One of which is how to be a warrior woman at work. And we're going to talk through a couple of different ways in which we can be warrior women here to really affect change. So, and I'll just say to all the guys in the room, I want to just really appreciate your listening to all of this too, because the skill sets are honestly gender neutral. But from the perspective of what warrior women need to do in the workplace, we're at a really interesting turning point right now. So to me, this is about a refusal to accept the status quo. So if you are in a working environment where you've seen instances of unconscious bias and you have not shouted it out, this is now where it needs to start. If you are aware in your workplace that somebody has been discriminated against or harassed, silence is no longer an option. We are really in a place right now from the standpoint of advocacy where we're at zero tolerance. And again, Me Too is a prime example of this, because you see all the seething frustration underneath the surface of what women and others, it's not just women, but women in predominant numbers have experienced, that has caused such rage at all the dreams that have been lost, all the opportunities that have been taken from us, the experiences that have been mapped onto our bodies. And from the perspective of how we shift this, some of it has to be about speaking the unspokens, right? For the first time ever, saying the things that we have been told we are not allowed to say. Telling the stories that we have been told over and over again that we are not allowed to tell. And simply the use of our voices in that way in work environments changes the corporate culture. And I'll tell you, I do work inside investment banks, huge financial institutions, publicly traded companies all the time. The ability of women, when they are empowered to actually speak the truth of their experiences in those environments, can change those cultures overnight. Because all of a sudden, it's not like there are unspoken things, hidden stories that are oppressing certain qualities and preventing women fundamentally from living out their true gifts, right? Because this is really what it's all about for me. It's about talent, and it's about why we're here. It's about talent and purpose. And so one of the other things that's really important to me when I talk about warrior women in leadership at work is that we think through why we're here. What's the purpose, right? And if we look back at the metrics I started with of traditional masculine models of leadership only valuing money and time, what warrior women and women in general in leadership bring to the table is an idea that we are all here with certain gifts that can be contributed to the collective. And the metric that I talk about when I go in, even in gender neutral environments, teach about leadership, is the idea that we shift from that metric toward a metric of growth, continuous growth of service. And part of that requires each and every one of us to be able to recognize the gifts and the purpose for why we're here, fundamentally. So to me, one of the things that has to happen in order for us to be able to fully embody our gifts, to live on our purpose, to serve out in the way that we need to serve, is that those stories are taken away so that the true totality of our voices can be heard. And so part of this aspect of stepping completely into our leadership as warrior women has to be about that use of voice that then allows us to contribute our gifts in different ways. Does that make sense to everybody? I hope so. And one of the things that I want to say about this as well, just while we're on the topic of purpose, is that if we are measuring success by consistent standards of growth, are we growing ourselves? Are we growing our teams? And this is not like the bottom line revenue growth that we're talking about, right? It's about the growth of the impact that you want to make in the world. If we are focused on that, then we are asking different questions about what success looks like. And this is where we get to have a true benefit for women in leadership, right? Because if we are modeling success on our growth, on our collaboration, on the difference that we make in the world, then inherently we care more about things like the quality of our lives. We care more about whether or not we can create work environments where women can contribute even if they've got children at home. We work to create cultural shifts that allow for childcare to be absolutely available to all of us so that we have an opportunity to contribute at the totality of our gifts. So the mental pivot away from money and time as the only metric towards different models of success is really key here. And I hope that makes sense. Okay, just a little bit on warrior womaning at home. One of the things that I just want to point out here is that even in households where women are primary earners, we still do 2/3 of the housework, and we do, right now at this moment in time, 50% more childcare than women did in the 50s, believe it or not. That's because models of parenting have changed. Pew Research, if you go look at these numbers, it's astonishing. One of the things that I want to make plain when we talk about cultural shifts here is that everything that we do, by the way, is political. I mean, I think this is kind of a given if you've been in a feminist movement at all in any way, shape, or form. But the most intimate conversations that we have about our needs and being supported inevitably impact the way that we are in the world. And so one of the things that is key here in the way that I think about this is that if we are not able to ask for what we need in our home environments, it also therefore becomes much more difficult for us to ask for it in the world. And so even at the tiny baseline conversations that we have with our partners and our spouses about like, who's doing the dishes, right? Like, who's taking care of the kids? Do we need help? How can I get help? I myself am a single mom, and I'm really big on like, can we create collaborative models in our communities that can help to support women in different ways that maybe have not been discussed before, that are outside of our old school historic model of, women doing women's work at home and men being out working in the world. We need to start getting creative about the solutions that we seek here. Those proactive conversations where we draw a line in the sand and say, this isn't working for me anymore, let me think creatively about how to make it different, inevitably lead us to places of being able to have more high stakes conversations out in the world at large. And so we can't forget that, right? And I also just want to mention one other thing here. I do not believe in work-life balance. I think, again, it's like a total myth that it could even be possible. I think what is possible, however, is to have lives that are in alignment with what we value. And for each of us, that's a unique metric, right? What do I value most in my life? How do I create a life that gives me that? And if we are not thinking about that individually for ourselves, we also can't create solutions for it in the collective. So starting at the baseline of what do I need most in my own home is a really important way to lead to being able and more courageous to have higher stakes conversations in other places. Okay, and lastly, the point of intervention of how to be a warrior woman in the world. So one of the things about activist women's leadership that to me is so compelling at this moment in time is that we are in a place where we actually have an opportunity to make a massive difference. Like, the world is cracking open right now. And the opportunity for change and to create a future that we want to live in is more compelling now and more possible now, I even think, despite the dark days that we seem to be living in, than it's been for quite some time. I think we can all, I'm 46 years old. Those of us who are 60s and 70s babies may have some vague recollection of other historic turning points in time where opportunities like this felt like they were possible. This moment feels particularly rich to me. And I want to remind you all that, in lots of mythologies, the cremation ground, the place where everything is burned to ash, is actually the most fertile place for growth. It's the place where you can plant seeds and create a future. And so where we find ourselves right now really has to be, and I'm such a big advocate for this in my daily resistance broadcasts, a place where we think about the future that we want to live into, and we start living from that place right now. So that means, for instance, that we don't, how shall I put it? We don't get down in the gutter and fight dirty if that's not the future that we want to live into. And it means that if we make choices about how we advocate from a place of kindness and compassion and acceptance. It also means that we are constantly working toward the future that we want. And so to me, part of this as well is about how do we stand up and fight for the future that we want in our world, for our children, in government, in the corporate environments that we work in. How every day can we step into modeling the future that we want to live in? Not easy. Like, I just want to say this, it's not easy. Managing our emotions, especially in times of turmoil and stress and trauma in our nation, is really, really hard. And we have to envision the world that we want to live into. We're the people who are going to lead the way on that, by the way. I hope that makes sense, that like women who step forward and really own this moment and take it through the transformation, this is like a birth process we're in right now as a culture and as a country. We know how to give birth, right? And one of the things that I think is key there is that we have to claim it, right? No one's swooping in to save us on this front, right? We have to be the people who lead the change at this moment in time to build that future because we can see it. So it's a very unique opportunity where we are right now, honestly. And if I could kind of leave everybody with a thought here about what we're leading into. The question I get asked more often than not is why, or what is this vision that you have of the future? What is this going to look like when we get there? I did a speaking tour this fall, and that was the number one question that I got asked in every location around the country was, what's this vision of the future that you have for women and for all of us? And so to me, the point of this is that we have an opportunity now to create a world where there is equity, where from the standpoint of even just corporate hiring and recruiting policies, like where are we going to recruit the next generation of women leaders, we can do all of that differently, where we can do things like pay equity analyses inside our companies and see how people are getting paid. From that all the way up to how do we create a place where no one is left behind in hopelessness, a government that represents all of us, a world where everyone has opportunity. What does that look like? To me, it looks like a place where we know that every human life has value, and where we step outside of the arbitrary hierarchies of race and gender and national origin and preference and everything else, orientation, and think through the idea that there's an arbitrary hierarchy of humans is just that, it's just a myth, right? And so if we approach the world we want to live in from a place of all of us having equality and equity and value, that means necessarily that we can't have policies that benefit some of us and don't benefit others, right? That create artificial differences between us as humans. And so to me, this is kind of like the big kahuna. We're in a big kahuna moment right now. And warrior women will change the world by being the people who write the path, right? I know a lot of this has been a lot more esoteric and heady than I anticipated it was going to be when I ran through it this morning for like the fourth time. But I think I'm going to wind down there and just say that for all the women in the room, I really want to encourage you to think through like what's the next step to taking your voice to the next level, and where can you step more fully into your own leadership, take up new skills and new armor and new weapons to change the world and make it better, and to recognize as well that your heroine's journey is your own story. And you get to choose how you live it, and that inevitably there is a heroine and a warrior woman in all of us. I think that's what I believe, and how we get there is within our own path and our own story and our own divining. But that it's really critical that we are action oriented in it, that we claim it ourselves rather than allowing ourselves to just be pushed through the flow of our lives. We really need to swim with the current, if that makes sense, and step fully into the opportunities that are there for us to battle for the world that we want to live in. So I think that's it for today. Very heady and esoteric, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm more than happy to take some questions if you would like.
Well, thanks for coming in.
Sure.
I have like many questions, but
sure.
I'll limit it to one.
That's fine. You can ask many questions. I'm good with that.
Yeah, maybe we could talk after.
Okay, sure.
But my question is around, I try my best to subscribe to feminism blogs and listen to different speakers and promote, but then I feel that when I am sometimes asked to summarize what I've heard, I have a very difficult time summarizing it because I don't live the experiences that many women experience.
Yeah.
And do you have tips and
yeah, well, so let me ask you a question. When are you asked to summarize it?
Generally with other men.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So that's a really interesting point, because let me just say this. I am a very big believer that we are not just at a turning point for women, we're at a turning point for men. And I talk quite a bit about the idea of sacred masculinity and modeling good masculinity to other men. So first of all, kudos to you for being willing to be a change agent on that front, because there are a lot of men who aren't willing to even make the effort. But the second thing I would say about this is that there is, in some sense, no substitute for men talking to women about about the experiences of women. Meaning that you can summarize to a certain extent, and of course you can do it to the best of your ability. And the next thing that comes out of your mouth, if it were me, would be, by the way, are you talking to your wife about this? Are you talking to your sister about this? Are you talking to your daughter about her experiences? So that you're learning it, and learning it through the prism of multiple women's experiences, if that makes sense. And I will also just add that there is nothing wrong with asking, what can I do to do it better? What can I do to make it better for you? What can I do to make it better for women generally? How can I be a better advocate? So I think it's not just about how can I summarize what I'm reading about, but also how can I propel men to be more engaged in the conversation about what a healthier masculinity would look like and how to make the world a better place for women generally. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you so much for your talk. It's actually pretty nice and very enlightening. You mentioned a couple of times this idea of a masculine model of leadership. And I was wondering what, in your view, a feminine model of leadership or a gender neutral model of leadership would look like.
So this is actually what we normally do when I go in and do corporate training and consulting. So you've given me a nice little transition here. So we have something we call the aligned leadership model, which is a model that actually has what we would consider to be like more feminine qualities of leadership attached to it. It is fundamentally an emotionally intelligent model of leadership, and it starts from the place of thinking through leadership from, there's 12 points on a pivot wheel. It would take me a whole other hour to go through it. But fundamentally, it starts from a place of the most effective leadership in today's environment being leadership that starts with curiosity and compassion. And so it's not, I am the king, like I'm the ultimate know-it-all of how this company should run. But really more of a questioning, a consistent questioning of how can we improve? What am I good at? What is my team good at? How can I look at what my gifts are and where I'm weak and build an organization that fills in the gaps? How can I value everyone's gifts on my team, right? And it also talks through the concept that I shared with you today of growth is one of the main metrics of success. So to me, I wouldn't want to call it a feminine model of leadership. I think it's far more healthy, right? Our aligned leadership model that we teach is really about how do you create healthy ecosystems inside companies where everyone is functional and moreover that is holistic, so that it's not just about what the person can perform at work. You guys are amazing in here, by the way. I have to say that of all the working environments that I've stepped into, this one seems to care the most about the totality of the human beings who work here, and that is amazing to me, and truly something to be honored and admired and uplifted. But so many environments that I walk into only care about what happens to the individual in terms of how they can provide for the company, right? And how they can perform when they're there. And if somebody's spouse is dying or someone's child is having a crisis, who cares as long as the bottom line needs are met? Aligned leadership to me is really about recognizing that that we're all connected, that organizations are only as healthy as the individuals who are within them, and that just in the same way that each of us have gifts to contribute to the world, organizations do as well. And so mission is really critical and important, and making decisions based on mission that are aligned with also all the individuals that make up that mission creates environments that people want to live in and work in and are loyal to, and that you can't imagine leaving. And just having talked to some of you today as I was walking around before here, that's very present here, right? That degree of respect and understanding of the way in which everybody who works here is connected and the needs of everyone being met. So that to me is about as close as I can get without doing like a full-blown all-day long training like I normally do in corporate environments on this. But yeah, it really is about emotional intelligence fundamentally as a principle, and then mission and purpose, and making all of your decisions about your people and the people who work for you as if we're a family, because we are, right? Make sense? Okay, good.
So I had a question about something you mentioned earlier. Earlier you said that the stories of many women had been erased. Is there some place we could go to look at? We could find those stories that have been repressed?
Well, so if they've been erased, you have to do a lot of digging. So I will tell a story about this that's kind of that really brought this home to me, but I will tell you that it took me about 3 hours of like serious digging on the internet to find anything that remotely looked like this. So my maiden name is Cronise, as you all know, and my father is really into ancestry. So one of the things that we discovered when he did all of this work is that our family on my father's side is originally from Alsace-Lorraine, and the spelling of our name originally in German means iron crown. And so I went digging because my father we were iron workers apparently in like the 15th century. You know, my dad's gone all the way back through all this. But I went digging to see, well, like, what's the reference point for this name? And I discovered in like 3 hours of kind of falling down a rabbit hole, this is, you know, the old lawyer in me, the researcher, that there was this thing called the Iron Crown. Some of you may know historically. But the Iron Crown was originally commissioned by a queen in like the 3rd century, whose name I'm now going to forget because nobody's ever heard of her because the history has been completely erased. But I did a whole podcast. I run this podcast called the Women's Leadership Podcast. I did a podcast on just this experience of recognizing that there had been a woman who basically had been the head of something the size of the Ottoman Empire at some point in our history that none of us know about. Like, I literally had not heard of this woman ever before until I went digging for all of this, because the stories that we are taught about history are the stories of men. And so, you know, to some extent, it's about your degree of, we're back to curiosity again, your degree of curiosity about women's history. And to some extent, it's also about recognizing that many of our traditions have always been oral traditions. And so this is one of the reasons why women's storytelling still is really important. And one of the reasons why I encourage women who want to know about even the history of their own families to go interview their grandmothers on tape before they die. Because otherwise it gets lost if it's not written down somewhere. So I wish I could say that there was like a magic an eraser button that would bring all of this back. But I think some of it has to be about how far are you as an individual willing to do the dig to then share it with the collective. I mean, this is a great opportunity, by the way, for a project. Like, somebody should start a Reclaiming Women's History project if it's not been done already, just so that we can start to see like all the gaps there. Yeah, so that's my answer to that. It's individual choice, I think, at this point.
So I am lucky to be in a leadership position, and I have a team that has one other woman on it, and the rest are men. And the team that I lead are generally somewhere in the range of about 15 years behind me career-wise. And what I've tried to do is to adapt my style to the needs of each person on the team, because they are very different. Their experiences are different, their communication styles are different. And try to give that hand up to all of them.
Yep.
And what I have found in the last year or two is that I sometimes have people call me out as favoring the woman on the team, even though when I sit down and talk to them about all of the ways that I'm investing in their careers and the things that I'm doing for them, they recognize that they're getting as much or more.
Yep.
And so, you know, as you're talking about our responsibility of kind of bringing up other women, you know, what about the people who stand on the sidelines and go, well, see, you're just playing favorites, and that's just no better.
Right. So it's hard to give up privilege. You know, as I said, it's really hard to give up privilege. And some of what the communication that we all need to learn, I think, to do better is also to say, equity is not about playing favorites, right? Meaning that, and the image that I share with people about equity versus equality is that in order to reach true equity culturally, you do have to lift up people who historically have not had the extra lift, right? It's like, you think about it from this perspective. The image that I've seen on this is that's so descriptive is, you know, you've got people at 3 different heights behind a fence, right? And equality is that everybody gets to stand on the same place on the fence. Equity is that everybody can see over it, right? And so sometimes that means that from a historic perspective, you have to do things differently in order to create equity. There will be a point, hopefully, in the future where we don't have to do that. But to me, first of all, that's not playing favorites, so I wouldn't call it that. You know, I guess it's the thing. You can shout it out and say, actually, that's not what I'm doing, and do what you're already doing there, which I think sounds like, I hope it's working to a certain extent. But the flip side of that as well is that if we do not actually start to make different choices in corporate environments as leaders, nothing shifts, right? Like, my biggest client is a publicly traded investment bank, and They did some research last year, and they discovered that only 4.7% of their senior executives are women, even though they hire 35% as women, and they're losing people, and they've never kind of investigated why, which is crazy to me, but they've never looked at it. One of the things that I've had to say to them is, why are you not recruiting at historically women's colleges, right? Why are you not thinking about maybe the fact that you need to provide different kinds of leadership training for women so that they understand how to navigate this environment better? Why are your senior male leaders not signing on to initiatives that say, we're making a commitment as an organization to gender parity, and here's what we're willing to do about it. Here's the investment that we're willing to make. Here's the training programs that we want to ascribe to. Because the other thing is that the unfortunate thing about being a woman leader right now in some environments is that you have to do the emotional labor of educating people about what it is that needs to change. And it is so much easier if senior male leaders also sign on to that as allies, so that the messaging comes from other men, right? We're back to this issue of how can other men work as allies to educate other men about the benefits of what's happening. So, I don't know. I don't want to tell you what all the solutions should be for you, but it does sound to me like you need some male allies as well on this front who can communicate this to your team in ways that make sense, so that you're not the one that is bearing the burden of doing the right thing and having them feel like that's unfair. Helpful?
Yeah, and it was more, I feel like on our team we have very good communication, and we've talked through this, and everybody's on the same page. But as I look around, and as you use that analogy of kind of giving a hand up to other women, it is something that everybody kind of has to think through in terms of, is this going to be misperceived as preferential treatment, or what's the best way to communicate that it isn't really? And I think you did a good job of covering that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi. I wanted to get your thoughts on the situation. It's not happening in this company, another company, to a friend of mine. She wanted to switch teams within the same company, had an offer with another team. She was pregnant a few weeks before her delivery. Talks to the manager, new manager, is offered this position. She plays the devil's advocate, saying, hey, I'm going to be gone a few months. I totally understand that is the response. We still want you here. We value here. Baby is born. It's been 2 months now. Now she gets a call saying, we think this position is no longer a great fit. We're not sure we would value you as much. It's a pretty reputed company. I can't tell you which it is. Very close friend of mine. I'm angry. And the manager talks to her saying, I want to grow the people who are currently in the team to be this manager. Well, nothing's changed. Her pregnancy hasn't changed. The same people continue to be in the team. Now there's suddenly a question. Now the way she's responding to us is she's playing the mentoring role for this manager and saying, hey, do what's right for the team. So business-wise, the right thing for the team is not to wait for a couple of more months for her to return back. And which is what is likely the manager hoping to hear from her. And I don't want her to be in a position where she's no longer going to be as much valued. The other options are, hey, we'll create a new opportunity that's like 1/3 of what you were supposed to own. It doesn't make sense. From owning the whole thing, why would I go back to owning a third? This is a big corporation here. I don't want her to fight against this corporation. Her career would be ruined after this. And so if you just wear the business hat, it feels like, yeah, the manager made a stupid mistake probably to offer her a job, and she's going to disappear in a few months. But I was happy that he did, thinking the long-term potential and the long-term value. What do you typically recommend? This, I'm sure, is just one of many instances that are happening out there today.
It's true. I have to say that it's really unfortunate, because I hear stories like this a lot. Pregnancy discrimination is still very real. And I to the point where when I'm coaching women leaders one-on-one, we have conversations proactively when they want to even get pregnant about how they have to prepare their team for that, how they have to prepare their senior leadership for it, how to disclose it. Women I coach through job transitions, like, when do I tell people I'm pregnant while I'm interviewing? These are all incredibly difficult questions that we still have to think about, which is crazy to me. But all that said, for your friend's situation, I guess the lawyer in me initially says she should find a good employment lawyer and actually ask some questions about what the strategy there has to be from a legal standpoint. And I know you don't want her to sue, but I will tell you that the employment lawyers that my company refers our clients to help people negotiate situations like this so that they walk the edge of it, meaning that that manager knows that he's doing something that's not quite right. I mean, it's obvious, or he wouldn't be having the conversation the way that he's having it. If she is able to come back with something that says, you made me this offer when I was pregnant, you knew that I was pregnant, I understand you now want to grow the team, but this is the offer that was made to me, and I still add value here, with the right kind of language that like basically signals that she knows what her rights are, that may actually help the situation dramatically. And I can give you the number. I have a very dear friend who's like the past head of the employment bar in DC and knows everybody in the country who does this kind of work and could find her someone to talk to. But that would be an initial strategy that I would want to approach it from. And then from the place of thinking through the business end of it, the idea of what value you add, her value has not changed. And so to me, I don't see that there's any business. I don't think he made a mistake. I think what's happening now is that he's second guessing for all the traditional stereotypical reasons. Is she going to be available? She's going to have a baby at home. Is she going to be as dedicated to the job as she was before? All those sorts of issues. And some of that has to be about her taking the lead to say, I'm here, I'm available, I'm ready, I want this, I'm going to do it. Nothing's going to fall through the cracks. I'm committed. It sucks that women have to have these conversations still forward looking, but they do. And so I think it's got to be the combination of her own self-advocacy to bring us back to where we've been today. And also she definitely needs a lawyer to just talk to. And I'm more than happy to give you that number after the fact if you would like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And thank you very much, Elizabeth, for coming to talk with us.